For the afternoon, we have two presentations. My job is just to introduce the moderator. It'll be the same format, presentation, in this case, not a panel, but one person, and then an opportunity for questions and answers, and the moderator will take responsibility for that. Our first guest speaker is Rhonda Turner, who's a clinical psychologist. And Damien O'Donovan, whom you all know, he's a key member of the Garda National Diversion Bureau and one of our key contacts in the development of the youth justice strategy and the development of the role of the YDPs. And Damien is going to act as moderator for this session. So I'll hand over to the pair of you. Damien.
Thanks, Declan. Welcome back, everybody. So our next speaker is, as Declan says, Rhonda Turner, who is a principal clinical psychologist at a national co-manager of the NIAP, which is the National Interagency Prevention provided by the Irish Child and Family Agency, TUSLA, which specialises in assessment and treatment of children and young people who have exhibited sexually harmful behaviour. Prior to that, Rhonda worked at St. Louise's unit, one of the child sexual abuse specialist services in Dublin, and coordinator with the Southside Interagency Treatment Team, which was transferred to TUSLA when she took up her post. She has also been chair of NOTA, which is the National Organisation for Treatment of Abusers. NIAP is developing a national service for the Republic of Ireland, which was launched in 2016. Additionally, on behalf of NIAP, Rhonda is integrally involved as a consultant to TUSLA's Specialist Residential Centre for young people. She specialised in the area of child sexual abuse and harmful sexual behaviour for over 30 years and is an experienced clinician, lecturer, trainer, advisor to the criminal justice system and researcher. Rhonda has presented at national and international conferences speaking on a range of connected issues to victims of child sexual abuse and children who have sexually harmed others. So I'm going to call on Rhonda. Thanks very much, Rhonda.
Hello, everybody. Wow, big room. All right, and I'm there. Sorry. Whoa. Trying to find a flat spot to put the coffee, and it didn't work. I'm gonna go there. Okay. Well, I got to be able to reach it. Yeah. Come back. Come back. We'll wipe that up before Brona gets here. Okay, Damien? Well, that's an entrance, I suppose. Anyway, it's lovely to see you all here. And I was just commented to Damien, you know, our worlds, our professional worlds, we really are quite separate, you know, from the child protection-y social work side of things to youth justice. Because normally, if I'm at one of our events, I would know, 30 to 50% of you. Do you know, I kept looking at faces, do you know? So it's great to be here, and certainly our professional worlds should cross way more often. Lorna and Damien gave me some kind of guidance on what they thought you might find helpful for working with young people who have exhibited harmful sexual behavior. Now, I say that, and it's a very wordy sentence. Young people who have exhibited harmful sexual behavior. That's how I prefer to say it, because they aren't sexual abusers, okay? If we say that, we're saying that's all they do. That's what they do, and they are gonna do it again. It's a bit like you're diabetic. No, you can't change that. So I always try to put it into a past tense. They have exhibited harmful sexual behavior, okay? And that you guys are running, a lot of you are professionally running into these kinds of cases where maybe a young person has been accused, maybe they're denying, maybe they've admitted to something else, and that's why they've been cautioned or with the JLO service. Maybe they've admitted, maybe they've been convicted, okay? So there's a huge range of what type of young person you might be coming in contact with. It's also important, I think, for you to know that I use the term children and young people all the time. And say within TUSLA, if you take a look at Children's First, it's children. Anybody under 18 is technically a child. But when you're dealing with those who have HSB problems, and there's my shorthand, HSB, okay, they can exhibit that harmful sexual behavior to people of different age groups. You know, did they do that to a young child? Did they do it to their peer group? Or was it to somebody older? When we're dealing with adolescents or young people, they often need very complex treatment plans. Not just because we're concerned that they pose a risk, but because they need so much help reintegrating back into their family, okay? Again, just said this at lunch. Can you imagine being a 15-year-old who sexually harmed somebody, and how your mother's gonna look at you, how your dad's gonna look at you? Whether you admit or not, your parents have got this thing in the back of their head now. I've heard from parents, you know, I couldn't do their laundry. I didn't want to touch their underwear. You know, mothers kicking such a young person out when they found pornography, because that was just another insult to the injury. So imagine being that 15-year-old who's just trying to grow up after you have done this horrible thing. But if your parents can never find a way back to you, what's that going to do to your psyche, to your development, and how you treat others? So a big part of what we do is actually about reparation within the family, so that the parents can find a way to accept their son or daughter, even though they have done this, all right? The other thing I want to be very clear on is no matter what I say today, we are never, those who have been harmed, the victims, are always close to our hearts and our minds, okay? They are how a victim has been impacted in their experience, truly important to the work we're doing with the children, young people who have sexually harmed. But at the same time, our trauma, our disgust, our upset with how the victim was treated has nothing to do with the young person who did the harming, okay? The child's family can be hugely upset, angry, deep scars, but that has nothing to do with the risk that the young person might pose for sexually harming again. That's one of the things that we struggle with, because I'm absolutely a believer in justice serving, having its course. So if a victim wants to have statements made, is praying that the DPP will attempt a prosecution, well, I'm gonna do everything to get our young person in NIAP to plead guilty, to not make it worse on the victim, to not expect the victim to have to testify. I've kicked out boys in our program for pleading not guilty because they'd admitted to us. They were admitting it, they were working on it, so why are you gonna make it worse for the people that you've harmed, all right? So the victims are always there, no matter how you might experience. Never think I'm making light of it, but what I'll be speaking to you about really is from a framework of those who have sexually harmed, okay? Under 12s, we also break down into two small groups, okay? You have the kind of the 3 to maybe 8, 9, and those are, we don't call them abusers. We would say that they had inappropriately behaved sexually. There was an inappropriate sexual behavior. We don't tend to use big words like abuse with those itty-bitty little ones. It can happen, and I always have a case that I would tell, I suppose in training, a 6-year-old little boy who had sexually abused his 2-year-old sister. The boy, when his mother was pregnant with him, all she wanted was a girl. She did not want a boy because boys were abusers, boys were pedophiles. So clearly, mom had her own history, okay? She was very, very affected. And then she had a boy. And she believed from the time she was carrying him and then carrying him that he was gonna become an abuser. Her next child is this wee little cute girl, and she became the princess. Imagine being that little boy. You know, the jealousy he had for his sister. Even though mom wasn't saying this stuff out loud to him, it was in every interaction. So when he was 6, what he told me when I was interviewing him at St. Louise's unit, well, I was mad at her, so I pulled her under the dining room table and I shoved it in her. I called that abusive, okay? That's exceptionally rare for an itty-bitty little kid, okay? So that's, sometimes I call them the, you know, that old saying, if you hear hoofbeats in the distance, look for horses, not zebras, because that's more often. These kind of crazy cases, they're like purple polka-dotted fluorescent zebras, okay? You can spot them, they're very rare, they do exist, but they can't hide, okay? They're really lousy at hiding, and we can spot those of that top kind of 2% of very, very challenging cases. The 10 to 12-year-olds, more often than not these days, are looking a lot more like an adolescent treatment program. They need more components and likely a longer course of treatment. And then, of course, we have the teenagers. The older they get, the more concerned we might be that if they have a thinking error or cognitive distortion, that it might stick and it may be more resistant to treatment. So the closer any of us get to our adulthood, it's harder for us to change some of our core beliefs. We can do it, but do we have to work at it or what? Do you know, whether that be, you know, anyway, face or hair, how we look, how we view the world, our thoughts on abortion, our thoughts on Donald Trump. Do you know, I don't see my thoughts, probably have a lot of distortions about Donald Trump as an American, but I don't think they're distortions, I think I'm dead right. You wanna try to convince me I'm wrong? Good luck. You know, I'm gonna stick with that core belief because I'm older, all right? But with teenagers, the younger they are, the better odds we are of influencing core beliefs that might be pro-abuse. Okay, the other very important thing I think in the backdrop of harmful sexual behavior is how important the parents are in the work itself, all right? Within NIAP, they have to have an adult who's a part of their treatment plan. So we've had that be parents, grandparents, foster parents, res staff, but we have to have somebody who is bringing them, sitting in their own parallel session about how best to help their young person, and is there then for when they leave. How'd you get on today? Was it tough? Oh, well, listen, tell me about that. Tell me what stood out for you and we'll have a chat. Come on, let's go to the chipper and we'll get that for the drive home. They need that care. Somebody gives a toss. Not only that they harmed, because coming in for treatment is not a punishment. It is about trying to make things better and different, okay? So they're coming in, let's say, to youth projects, such as yourselves, because I know there's quite a range here of roles. And one of the questions that was kind of put to me was, how do you manage information? Reliable or otherwise? And for that, I was kind of assuming it's more about they maybe are with you on a burglary charge of some kind, but yet you know there's been this sexual harm in the past somewhere, or there's an accusation. So who needs to know what? How do you manage that information? Where are you going to put it? Who needs to know? Does the young person need to know that you know? And who else knows? All of that, I think, is really important to be including the young person. They need to know who knows what, because they have this fear. You know, part of the reason that a lot of kids delay an admission is they're afraid, if you know I did it, you're going to look at me funny. If you know I did it, you're going to treat me differently. If you know I did it, you know, the rug is going to get pulled out from under my life. My mom will kick me out. My dad will kick me out. Somebody's going to go into care. I'm going to go to Oberstown. So all those fears are there. So it is really important that they know who knows what, because then you can kind of prove it to them a little bit. We just had this down at our specialist res, which is just for boys who have sexually harmed others. And we had to tell one of the lads, no, we've actually known about that for 3 months. But, you know, we were advised not to discuss it with you. Have I changed? Did I change in any kind of a way? Have I treated you? Did you notice anything? You know, did I suddenly quit giving you 2 scoops of ice cream? So sometimes it can be the proof that you're still there for them in whatever way is appropriate, okay? I think you do need to be careful, okay? And obviously we all know about confidentiality, but it is, lads have heard things, and young females as well. Maybe they hear at the staff office, maybe somebody says something just as you're closing the door, but they pick up on stuff. So they need to know that you're really boundaried, that you're not gossiping about them, right? That you're not treating them any differently, but that you're there to try to help them. And I'm going to speak to that more, about that kind of direct working. I think it's also important in those cases where there is no conviction. Let's say you have the accusation and they deny it, but TUSLA's social work department has found it as a founded concern. Are you clear within your own infrastructure? Can you use that to say, well, TUSLA says it happened, therefore I believe it happened, okay? Because if they know that they can wiggle around you, they're gonna wiggle. Oh God, did they love to wiggle, you all know that. But if you're coming at them with, listen, I think that it's pretty likely that that happened the way little Mary said, and I know how to help you, so let's just get on with it and help you, right? If you try to get the admission, it's kind of like a squirrel with an acorn getting ready for winter. Okay, if you try to get that acorn of an admission, they're not gonna give it to you. They're just gonna get squirrely, right? So you need to work with them slowly and let them just figure out they can trust you, not to treat them differently and not to judge them. Now, obviously there's judging in the court and we don't agree with their behavior. We do not like their behavior. It was not okay what they did. But you've got to inhale your judgment, your judginess, to figure out how best to help them, okay? If you're trying to keep them out of a high-risk situation, then it might be about helping them understand you don't need another accusation. Let's say 15-year-old lad wants to coach the under-9 GAA with his mates, and he should not be doing that. Okay, our guidelines would state, no, you should not be alone or in a position of authority over anybody more younger or vulnerable than you. So no, you don't get to be the coach of the under-9s. And he's gonna be mad, very, very mad and disappointed often. But it's about, listen, why would you put yourself in that situation? What if any one of those kids said, but he hurt my bum? Because there was smoke, there's going to be fire, and there's gonna be a big reaction, and nobody's gonna be really caring about what really happened, because they're gonna panic first and try to protect everything. But if you're not even there to get accused or for there to be a misunderstanding, isn't that better for you? And I know when I was little, my brother is a lot older than me, 12 or 13 years older, and he used to hurt my bum with a tea towel. Snap, snap, snap. Right? So oftentimes, it's a misunderstanding that gets overly interpreted because most of the kids will not sexually harm again. I'll come back to that. There's a huge range of types of sexual harm these days. Sexting, which can involve then production of child pornography, distribution of child pornography, technically, etc. If you ask a teenager to define child pornography, they will be nowhere near the legal definition. In their mind, child pornography is classic, it's the stereotype. They're thinking of just graphic, horrific images of a child involved in sexual situations where it's clear and unequivocal. But I've worked with young people who are self-reporting a sexual interest in children, and they're masturbating to an ad for a child in nappies. Okay? So what is child pornography? What is sexually arousing? They certainly don't think sexting naked pictures or seeking naked pictures from a peer. They don't think of that as child pornography. In the steps of dating, they think it's a part of the dating. They think it's a part of the steps. And a lot of the lads, certainly, think that the sexting is before you even get to the meeting. And meeting being the not too long ago term that the young people were using to kiss. And they'd go down to the park, Johnny wants to meet you, and Sally goes down when her friend tells her, and she goes down, and she may never have spoken to him before, but they're gonna have a meet kiss. So what are the steps of dating? Because that wasn't how I did it. I actually would be really excited about a little piece of research. I like to get some teenage boys together and then some teenage girls and have them come up with what they think are the steps of dating, because I bet you the girls' steps don't even match the boys' steps these days. But what are the new steps of dating? But for them, sexting is a part of that. So even within your programs, a very basic preventative thing is they need to know that's pornography. They need to know that that's illegal and why it's illegal, because they just don't get it otherwise, okay? Within the sexual behaviors, you've got the sexting, and then we have the groping. The maybe lad walks up to a girl at school and grabs her breast as he's walking by. What do we do with that? I'm sure, I remember the days when I was younger and fitter and go to Copper-Faced Jacks. Yeah? How many of us have been sexually assaulted in Copper-Faced Jacks, technically speaking, okay? Now we have the Me Too movement, everything is different. How do you flirt? Would you like to explain what to say to a 15-year-old boy about how to flirt? Okay, what's not going to be constituted as sexual harassment or unwanted sexual advances? Okay, and that is really tricky, really tricky. One of my clients who's on the autistic spectrum, and he takes everything very concretely, he was convinced, okay, so what Rhonda's telling me is I just keep asking until they say yes, and that's consent. It's like, no, that's harassment. You get to ask twice, and literally giving them guidelines. You can ask once. If you've gotta, ask a second time, but dude, you gotta be ready to back up and get out of Dodge, because if they're telling you no, you gotta listen to the no, all right? So then we move up into the various other contact sexual abuse, or online types of abuse. The zebras who are purple and neon with polka dots, as well as stripes, those are the young people who have a self-reported sexual interest in children. They are at risk of pedophilia. Pedophilia is the sexual attraction to under 18s. You have ebophilia, which is particularly kind of post-pubescent teenage girls. But most people who sexually offend are not pedophiles, even in the adult world, okay? Pedophilia is actual sexual attraction to children, okay? A lot of adults who have sexually harmed others, it's power, it's entitlement, it's substance misuse, it can passive aggression. There can be a lot of different things that go into it. But certainly for juveniles, technically speaking, they'd be a pedophile. They're under 18 and they're sexually attracted to somebody else who's under 18. Technically, they're a pedophile, before they even leave the house. So self-reported sexual interest in children is a very specific cohort. Very few, very few. And that interest usually is coming from somewhere, okay? It may be their own sexual abuse victimization. It could be overexposure to a range of pornography, because as they say, there's porn and there's porn, The porn that was being shown in the 60s is not necessarily the porn you're gonna find on Pornhub, let alone the dark web, okay? So what are they being exposed to? What kind of appetites do they have? Are they needing more and more graphicity or coercion in their porn diet? And then we know that if you don't go check out, Pornhub does annual reports every year, so you don't actually have to go to the porn site, folks. But it'll tell you how much porn people are consuming and the types of things they're searching for. The fantasies for sister, dad, mother, brother. Crazy stuff. That's what people are looking for their fantasies, okay? But not all fantasies are going to become real life. But if you've got a vulnerable kid who maybe has poor social skills, doesn't have many friends, and he's using porn as sex education, boy, is he going to make mistakes. You know, let's just, where do you begin? Porn isn't great for safe sex. It's not great for condoms. It's not great for consent. And a lot of that needs to be demystified for the teenagers. So even in your work, any teenager today needs some information about real world versus fantasy. There is a website, if you Google, it's Time We Talked, and add the word Australia, okay? And it's a lovely resource. They have these little short video clips, including a porn star who's talking about her and her boyfriend. If he thinks I'm sticking my legs up in the air, he's got another thing coming. You know, it's like, that's porn and this is real life, okay? There's a lad, very cheeky Australian lad, and he's like, man, I've been watching all this porn, and then I thought I'd try it with my girlfriend. Dude, big mistake, right? So it allows you to start having those conversations with the young people about reality versus porn world, okay? A tricky part of the work we do, though, is with the what I'm going to call neuroatypicals. Kids, okay, being on the autistic spectrum, or ASD, is not a risk for sexual harming, okay? But we do have a lot of kids who have harmful sexual behavior problems who happen to have some kind of empathy deficit, and it might be autistic spectrum. And then closely associated with that, we're seeing another cohort of kids who might have fetal alcohol syndrome or substance in utero exposure, okay? So if mommy was using substances or alcohol in utero, we're seeing difficulty in their executive functioning, how they problem solve, how they make decisions, how they rationalize. And those kids, both the ASD kids and the FASD, fetal alcohol syndrome disorder, they can be really tricky to treat. We had a young person from the Louth Meath area who everybody wanted the case to go to trial. He was fully admitting, because ASD and fetal alcohol kids, they really don't lie. They hardly ever lie. They'll lie sometimes to get out of trouble, but he was given all kinds of detail about every single sexual offense. We found out more victims, way more victims than anybody thought he had, because he will just talk, because that's part of their presentation. But if that kid had gone through the legal system, he'd be eaten up and chewed up alive because of his fetal alcohol. He doesn't get cause and effect, you know, and so he has a lot of rules and safety nets built in around him, mantras he has learned that make it livable for him to be out in the community. But he needs a lot of ongoing support. So he will be a lifetime persistent young person. He's one of our purple polka dotted zebras. But he doesn't want to do it again. Do you know? He just wants to have sex, but he's kind of sexually indiscriminate because how he views the world and how he views people is so very different. Now again, he's one of the 1%ers, okay? Most of our kids who are on the autistic spectrum, when they got sexually curious around puberty, they got a fixation and they acted on it, and it hurt people. It was illegal, it was wrong. But the young person doesn't necessarily see the harm, because kids who are on the autistic spectrum, they don't really think about the other person, okay? If you ever get more curious about that, look up some stuff on theory of the mind. Because for the ASD client, it's me. Oh, you think like me. Everybody thinks like me. If I was upset, they'll be upset by that. Everybody's upset by that. But they don't get that they're unique and that they have their own ways of viewing the world. So when you're trying to teach them about victim empathy or a victim's distress or resistance, they don't get it, right? But we can give them rules to safeguard it. A lot of our young people do have some form of trauma in their background, but not necessarily sexual abuse. It can be everything from broken families, domestic violence, but maybe they weren't hit themselves, you know. All right. The other important thing to know about is that treatment for this population does work. If there's Whirling, which is WORLING, and Curwen, CURWEN, 2000, and there's another Whirling article in 2010. They did longitudinal studies on treatment and non-treatment of juveniles who had sexually abused. Treatment works, okay? Without treatment, 1 in 5 teenagers are likely to sexually harm again, without treatment. That's if we just do nothing. They just get caught, get given out to, have consequences of some kind. 1 in 5 are gonna do that again. But if they have treatment, we're down to 5%, okay? So you're dealing with 18, 19% versus 5%. So we know treatment works. But do you know what this group has a real problem with? Is other general criminal behavior, all right? At 10 years post-treatment, 18% had a sexual charge. 54% had a charge of any kind. 54, okay? Again, treatment works. Having participated in treatment for harmful sexual behavior, it brought down their general criminogenic behaviors down to 35%, okay? So even if they're getting treatment on sexual offenses, it's going to help them generally, and that's why we're certainly really holistic, okay? I care about them being respectful to everyone in every situation, not just private sexual contact. You know, it's not okay to hurt people, whether that be sexual or in any way. It's not okay to bully, be mean, you know, because those are the things that are going to get them into trouble. So in the work for yourselves to be doing with them, and you each are going to have varying degrees of comfort with this, and again, I don't know your specific roles, so maybe this is completely inappropriate for you to do, so please check with your own line management. If the harmful sexual behavior is on the table, right, we know, they know, we know, then it's about if you're doing one-to-one direct work, you know, obviously you're not saying this in front of other people, to be saying, listen, I know about what happened with Mary, and if you ever need to talk about that, I'm, you know, happy to help you out. I've got some ideas. I know you've got like an anger management problem, huh? That's gotten you into lots of problems in the past. Well, I don't know if that had anything to do with what you did or not, but sounds like that's also a really good place to help you out. You know, sometimes, you know, if we have problems managing our moods, we might take it out on other people, you know, so let's help you out with that, all right? So at least they know you know, and they know you're trying to help them maybe even in a roundabout way. None of you here are gonna have to deal with treatment of sexual dysfunction. I get that lovely privilege, okay? So you're not gonna be having really graphic conversations. What you might be doing, though, is helping them take responsibility for their actions. Not just about the harmful sexual behavior, but about anything, do you know? If their bike got stolen, but they didn't put the lock on it, do you know? They left it out in the rain. You could be having a chat about, well, you gotta mind your stuff better, don't you? Do you know? How can you have a plan when you get the new bicycle that's gonna make sure you put it away? And what about your lock? How are we gonna make sure you don't forget your key? How are you gonna do that? Because it's your bike, you need to be doing that, right? Are they being responsible and respectful to whoever they're living with? You know, there's an okay way to express your anger and there's not okay ways. So you wanna be on top of harm, any harm to others, whether that's verbal, emotional, physical, sexual, etc. But you do that in a way that's kind of non-judgy. We're just trying to teach them. You know, listen, I didn't like it when you spoke to her that way. That wasn't okay. You know, I think we should just sit down and have a three-way. You know, but you use it. You don't avoid it. You don't hide from it. It's about being comfortable in naming what the issue is. And the real bottom line on that it's not just about the sexual behavior, okay? That's not what I'm encouraging you to necessarily get to the bottom of. It's those general behaviors that we would be helping any teenager with. You know, man, if you spoke to my boss that way, ooh-wee, you know, you need to name it. One of the things I talk about in training as well is this kind of flag approach or gold nugget, okay, whichever way helps you. The flag is kind of like saying, I saw that behavior, it wasn't okay, I'm gonna put a flag in it. Hey, John, you know, that kind of wasn't okay. Yeah, will we chat maybe after tea time? So you let them know they did something out of the ordinary, but you round it off with, well, here's how it made me feel, what was going on? What were you trying to accomplish, right? So you process it with them if you have that relationship with them, okay? If you don't, you can still put the flag in, but pass it to the person who they have the relationship with, okay? The other way of looking at it is gold nuggets. If any of us were walking down North Circular Road and we saw a gold nugget, would we just pass it over? I think most of us might go, ooh, what is that? Looks like it might be precious. Looks like it might be valuable. Oh, let me get that. When they drop stuff that you know is clinical gold, you know, man, that's important. Ooh, do you believe he spoke to her that way? Oh, that's signs of coercive control. You know, when you spot it, don't ignore it. Don't wait till you're on next week. They're gonna forget he's gonna forget what he did, okay? So when that stuff happens, flagging it, picking it up, naming it for them, doesn't mean you have to process it all right then, okay? Maybe you're not the one who processes it. Maybe it's a therapist, maybe it's a social worker. You know, you go back to who has that relationship with them, all right? Really, whether they're HSB problems or non-HSB problems, you can help them with so many areas that are just about helping teenagers. They don't get consent, okay? They think they do, but they don't understand freezing, okay? Even if they're, you know, in a dating kind of a peer situation. If the girl freezes or the guy freezes, does that mean, well, they didn't stop me? Or does that mean they're frozen and don't know how to get out of the situation? You know, some jurisdictions in other countries are going so far as to, actually there was something as well in Ireland about it, about should we have proof of consent? You know, do you actually need the other person to say yes? Now, I don't know. Again, I would hate to be dating in 2022. You know, how you get consent, how things progress, what's okay. It is tricky. But now imagine being 15 and not a clue, okay? So these are the areas: respect, consent, responsibility. They also need to know where the limits are, okay? And giving them that psycho-ed bit around what is illegal, what constitutes harassment, what constitutes bullying, stalking, child pornography. Why is that line there, and don't bloom and cross it, you know? In your doing of the work, the last things I'll say here kind of before closing, you've got to be confident that you can have the conversation, okay? Again, we don't always have to use sexually graphic words or body parts, because if any of you have that specific role where you would be interviewing them maybe and trying to get the facts about what they're saying, well, then you better not be nervous or uncomfortable, okay? I get lots of admissions. And every time I get an admission, I ask them, well, what made you decide to share that with me today? And they'll say, I knew you could handle it, okay? I'm not judging. It's like, listen, dude, it takes guts. It's brave to admit that you've sexually harmed somebody. Do you have any idea how gutsy you are? I'm so proud of you. That's not what they expect, right? The other part of that is how they're helping the victim. They're making it easier on the victim. It's not about them being believed now, so you're helping them, right? But you've got to be confident. So if you need to say words like willy, vagina, Mary, bum, masturbation, wanking, whatever the word is, you can't be going, well, you know that, I know it's really awkward to talk about, isn't it? That's not gonna work, okay? They see your discomfort and you're just feeding their discomfort. The last kind of points here, help them with their social skills. Help them with assertiveness and how to be appropriately assertive, how to get their needs met without being demanding. Help them develop friendship skills. Help them figure out how to chat somebody up. They honestly, every time we do the dating relationship module, they are like little sponges. They have no clue. How do I chat somebody up? Not a clue. And then every couple of years, I'll go ask some young people and teenagers or friends, about their daughters or sons. And I'll ask them, I said, listen, could you float this question and just give your answers back on a sheet of paper to me? I don't need to know who said what. But then the girl maybe will take it to her mates. Hey, what do you think? The lads have questions. Why do they all go to the bathroom together? I'm serious. We get that one every year, okay? Building their self-esteem, helping them emotionally regulate. Those are all the places you can help, and you do that with every single case, okay? With them, you might occasionally need to say, well, the reason I'm making a deal about it is because, you didn't respect your brother when you did that, okay? So I'm paying attention to how you respect other people. You respecting other people matters, and that's why I'm making a big deal about it, The rules are different for you because of what you did. What do you think your brother would say if he saw you do that? Do you think your brother would be feeling safe, or would he be scared? Would he be angry? Might he get worried you're going to do it again? We have one case where the kid, he's going to give me beyond gray hair. I think I'll pull all my hair out. He keeps watching pornography on his phone when he goes home for access, because it's his opportunity on the phone. But he's watching porn on his phone in the sitting room with his 2 victims in the sitting room. And you're like, dude, if your sisters found out what you're looking at, they really aren't going to trust you, to be coming home. All right? So that's basically, kind of the broad overview of your direct work with them around generic issues. If you do have a need to do direct work around the sexual behavior, just make sure you're in keeping with what other professionals are involved. Okay? We don't need to have 30 people having intense conversations with these young people. Okay? So we try to whittle it down to who do they have the relationship with. And the other thing is that every young person in NIAP knows there are very few, if any, limits to confidentiality. They know we're going to talk with our treatment team. We are going to share with your parents. We're going to share with the social worker. We're going to share with the JLO. Everybody involved in their life who has a responsibility is going to know what we're working on and where you're at in your treatment. So it's not classic therapy with whatever they say stays in the room. No. That's not what, we can't do that when we're managing risk, all right? And I actually just reminded myself the risk thing. I can't believe, Damien, that I left out my risk pet peeve. There are no scientifically validated measures to assess risk of teenagers who have sexually harmed. They don't exist, okay? I'm sure most of you in here have house insurance or car insurance. Those insurance providers are really good at predicting who's going to cost them money. They're really good at it. There's like no talking to an insurance company about adjusting your rate. They know your age, how far you're driving, if you're in the city, if you're in the country, and they can predict pretty reliably so that they keep making profits. Yeah. We have predictive measures for adults who have sexually abused, which are reasonably robust, okay? Not great, but they have some data. We do not have any data on the teenagers, okay? They turn 18, and then we need new consent to research them. So when they're 28 and we want to do a 10-year follow-up, we kind of need their permission. How do we go find them again? Do we write to them? They may not live there. So what do we say in our lovely letter that might be opened by the new people who live there? How do we get in touch with them? How do we get consent for research? So it's a really tricky issue, and it makes it dang near impossible to get a lot of data to make the adolescent tools predictive, okay? If they are high concern, they may not be high concern 6 months later. Any of the profiles like AIM-3 or the JSOAP, et cetera, will expire. I will get calls 10 years down the road and they want to know, is he still a risk? I'm like, that was 10 years old, it's expired. You know, that risk assessment, and even calling it that annoys me, is not helpful, okay? So the good news is treatment works, their profiles are gonna change. Drop the word risk as much as you can, change it over to being concerned, okay? And I'm gonna shut up now. All right, thank you very much.
I'd like to present Rhonda with the drink I tried to steal from her.
Yes, thank you, thank you. I am for just a second, yeah.
Thanks very much, Rhonda, for those insights into your many years of experience in this area, which we really appreciate. I had a couple of prepared questions before the presentation, which you actually touched on there throughout. Just one, I suppose, before I opened up to the floor, is just around maybe where youth justice workers and JLOs don't have any information of any previous offending. Is there any particular behaviours or signals that you might observe in a young person that may indicate that they are motivated to sexually harm? That's just one question I had.
Yeah, is my mic? Yeah, he's got me on the air. Okay, teenagers who have sexually harmed or might be at risk, or there's concern that they could do so again, there is no mathematical formula to figure that out. It's very much like profiling in a lot of ways, okay? If a teenager has sexually harmed a young child, I'm not gonna worry about them too much with their peer group, okay? The people who might need to know are even less and fewer, because to sexually harm a child, in their minds, they're little, I can control it, I can get them not to tell. It doesn't take a lot of confidence. You know, you don't even need social skills, really, you know, when they're trying to have sexual contact with a child. But to approach their peer group, crikey, that takes guts. You know, let's go back to chatting up. They ain't got a clue how to chat up. So what you often will see is maybe a young person who has sexually harmed a child, but they're making mistakes in their peer group. They think commenting on the size of her breast is going to be cool and she'll like that, okay? That's not usually how women are thinking, but maybe it is when you're a 15-year-old girl. So they're not a danger to their peer group. They're only in danger of doing something stupid like all the other teenagers, okay? And it's more in that mistake and they're learning. But in posing, if they have a sexual assault history with their peer group or anybody who's older, well, that takes more guts. You know, that is a different treatment profile altogether. That's about not respecting, accepting the no. If you've got those kind of kids, you do want to watch out for anything under that coercive control kind of pathway. How manipulative are they being? You know, there's a difference. Guy fancies girl. Guy wants to chat her up and get her to be romantic with him so he has a chance of, you know, having sex. So how does he go about that? You know, contacting them online, you know, and it's that push, it's that pressure, and they just keep pushing it. Watch out for that kind of stuff, okay? Any kind of push and pressure where their wishes are not being respected, you need to be kind of hanging on that one. Listen, she said no. Sounds to me like she doesn't want to walk that way. You know, it's like you're there to kind of mirror back, listen to the no, all right? And any sense that they're really playing puppeteer, you know, we've got, if you're hearing about fake profiles, catfishing, and that's not always trying to trick the other person. It might be because they don't like themselves and poor self-esteem. They think nobody will like the real them, so they put up this other persona. But if you're hearing stuff about fake websites, if you're hearing stuff about poor online behavior that's crossing a line, that's going to be some of your cues that will they keep going. And if you know they have crossed a sexual line before, well then certainly you need to be concerned because they're still crossing lines. You know, did you not get it when they said no and the guards came out and, you know, you got your JLO? Did you not get it? You know, you need to be listening to this, you know, and respecting that no. You know, how do you feel when your no is disrespected. Gosh, do you ever think they might feel the same way? Oh, that's just like a light bulb moment, okay? They really don't get that other people might feel the same way that they did when they were not believed or disrespected. Yeah?
Thanks, Rhonda, for that. We have some roving mics in the room, and we have a number of minutes left if anybody'd like to pose a question to Rhonda. We have one there.
Hi, Rhonda. My question just is, how do you think in Ireland we prepare our young people to live in the world of porn, sexting? Do you see gaps, and what do you think we could do?
I absolutely agree. I would completely support information about pornography being part of the curriculum in schools. And I also think that information should be rolled out, giving parents kind of a guidebook on the topics to cover in dating and relationships. Sex ed is not the talk, it is a conversation, and it goes on. And everybody needs to start younger. What was out of NUI Galway, average age, for first looking at pornography was 12-ish, and that freaks out an awful lot of mommies. All right, my baby was seeing nudie pictures, they're 12, they believed in Santa last year, right? So everybody kind of needs to get on board with dating and relationships. And part of that is addressing pornography. Again, without being judgy, okay, because my own moral values about what I might do if porn was part of my life or part of my relationship. What it's about is what's going to help you, okay? Is that showing you what it's really like? No. Giving them the facts. Sexual dysfunction is a real risk with high porn use, okay? The research is very clear. And what that might be about is, well, can they ejaculate and have a successful masturbation experience without pornography? Do they have to have the visual aid in front of them? And that's changing. That's changing. When I was little, we played pretend, and we didn't even have props. We'd pretend cops and robbers or mommies and daddies cooking in the kitchen, right? And we used our imagination. Today it's social media and video games. There's less imaginative play happening. So can our lads, if they get used to watching pornography, can they get past that? Can they go back to where any kind of a fantasy, they can picture it in their head, whether it's Ariana Grande or whoever, but we want them to have healthy sexual lives and not require pornography. So it's about the risks, the benefits, and it's also about what, you are what you eat. Well, with porn, you're a bit of what you watch, okay? And if they need to up it, that's a problem. Maybe straight ordinary porn, whatever that is, maybe was fine then, but now they're watching S&M, bondage, consent is clearly not happening. They're watching people who are distressed and traumatized by the sexual act. If they need this higher level, that's a problem, okay, to their psychosexual development. And then you've got, will they go on to do that? Does the fantasy have to become reality? Will it only stay in fantasy? So how do they curb their diet? How do they create new nutritional habits? There are things that are funny or abnormal or weird, but they're not illegal, okay? So I'm not here to play, police with their private life. Are they what do they call them, furries? People who like to have sex when they're dressed up like fuzzy animals, or people who want to be in nappies and taken care of by a mommy figure while they're, well, listen folks, it's not illegal. So if it floats their boat, I'm happy. As long as they're not harming people, as long as it's respect and consent. But if they're getting off in a path where they're gonna break a law, where it is disrespectful and cause harm, well, that's what we need to help them even know, how to be a critical thinker. I'm not gonna do this. That's too much. That's a line I won't watch in porn. I love scary movies, but I will not watch a blood and guts. You know, I have a line. Do they have a line? And then there's a whole thing about ethical porn. Now there's a rabbit hole. Don't do it on your work computer. But ethical porn has a whole world. There's a site that's Make Love Not Porn, and everybody on that site is showing sexual encounters that are real life, where maybe the girl says, oh honey, you're on my hair, oh could you move? You know, they don't do that in porn, right? So, but it is advocating they don't want made up production pornography. Does it involve trafficking? How do you know it doesn't involve trafficking? Anyway, so ethical porn, whole rabbit hole. Yeah, don't you love my job? Yes, my laptop scares Tusla. Okay.
Thanks, Rhonda.
I'm not watching porn, folks. I'm just in the educative branch.
We might have time for one more question if there is more.
Hi, Rhonda. How are you going?
Yeah, thanks.
I just have a question there. You were saying that society has changed quite a bit in the last number of years. I'm just wondering, do you have any thoughts about accessibility to mobile phones and through that then accessibility for young people to access porn at an earlier age?
Well, it's, you know, this is multi-agency parenting, including the parents, obviously. You know, if I had my magic wand, parents would be starting to have chats younger. You know, you start teaching consent and respect, right? Try asking any one of your teenagers, what does respect mean? They don't have a whole lot big vocabulary on this one, all right? It's this concept that is really hard to define. What are the ways we show respect? You know, I respect my family by one of the many ways, I don't leave the kettle empty. You know, that's a respectful thing to do. It's thoughtful for the next person coming down, you know. So teaching parents, helping their kids with respect and consent from very young ages. You know, that's not how you treat your friend, you know. You don't lie, you don't cheat. Where are the values? And then when you're working on it within the sex ed, the dating, and the pornography stuff, if you're having those kind of conversations, well, what's the value of pornography? Okay, research, very clear in 2 or 3 countries, parental negative attitudes towards porn results in less porn for their young people when they become adults, because they're instilling a value that is not for pornography. What's your value about pornography? Pornography is acceptable if I'm not in a relationship. If I am in a relationship, I need to have a chat with my partner about porn, because maybe porn makes them feel inadequate. Maybe porn makes them feel like I don't love them. You know, what are the rules about where porn is used? Okay, you can do that, honey, in the spare bedroom, but don't you dare bring that into our bed. You know, but these are the kind of things we need to help them have, those adult conversations. But that's part of being a teenager, too. They can't assume that the girls all like porn, you know? Porn is being viewed by girls and by boys almost as high as the boys. The values are changing, and the only way you're gonna know about it is by talking, okay? And being comfortable, you know, and maybe you don't do a face-to-face, you know, maybe you do let's play a video game and we're gonna chat about dating, you know, because it's just too intense to be looking at each other. But, you know, God bless the car journey. Yay, you know, you're trapped in the car. But it is about trying to find a way to chat and letting them know you're cool and that it's not about judging, and whether you have or you haven't had sex, that's not what I'm asking you about right now. I just wanna make sure that you know how to be safe, you know, and those little steps of safety. Just because you agreed to a kiss doesn't mean you agreed to intercourse. And is there anybody in here who has not heard of tea and consent on YouTube? Is this something you're familiar with? Yeah? Okay, if you aren't, go to YouTube, tea and consent. You know, I can ask you I can say agree to a cup of tea, but by the time you go make it, boil it, put the milk in and everything, I can change my mind and I ain't having tea. And you can't make me have tea. And if I'm asleep, I don't want tea. Don't pour it down my throat when I'm asleep. Anyway, it's like this 2-minute cartoon that the kids get, all right? Very cute. Yep.
Thanks very much, Rhonda. We're out of time, so I'd like to thank you very much for your presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda. Thank you, Damien. It can be really enriching when related worlds that don't come together do come together and we get an insight into related fields. And I know from the feedback and the responses to some of Rhonda's witticisms that you were really engaged with the presentation. Next guest speaker is Brona Starr. Superintendent Paul Franey is going to moderate the same format presentation followed by an opportunity for questions. My job is to introduce Paul and then I'll hand over to him. Paul Franey is Superintendent in Balbriggan Garda District. He's the chair of the local YDP. He was formerly in charge of the Garda Strategic Planning Unit and the Garda National Victims Office. And he's a history of involvement at EU and Council of Europe level on hate crime and LGBT issues. In 2017, he co-authored an LGBTI hate crime training manual for police officers on behalf of the Council of Europe. He's a qualified life coach, particular interest in career and professional development. He brings that to bear in running career seminars for serving Gardaí and Garda staff. Former secretary and founder of G-Force, which is the LGBT employee network within An Garda Síochána, and former vice president of the European LGBTI Police Association. He has a number of third-level qualifications in the area of human rights, governance, management, life coaching, sociology, and politics. And he's been very supportive of the Youth Diversion project in North Fingal, and I know that because I was subject to some very gentle and very graceful, but nonetheless arm-twisting recently on the question of resources. And the serious point that I want to make on Garda Síochána being the organisation that it is, and notwithstanding that JLOs are hugely important people, having the superintendent or the chief superintendent there when I or one of my colleagues turns up at a meeting about resources is hugely important. When I go back to the department, we're spending a huge amount of money. If I can say local Garda management have situated this in the context of the overall policing needs and the issues they face, and particularly in Balbriggan, in the context of an increasingly diverse community in that part of North Dublin, that's hugely important. Spending a lot of money, going back accounting from what I do to my colleagues, being able to say, chief or the super was there and they said they had to have this. That's really important. So talk to your local district and divisional officers next time the Minister of State or whoever it is coming out to meet you. Paul, hand over to you now, and Brona, you might join the stage as well.
Good afternoon, folks. And this is a very big room. So my role today is quite small. I'm here to introduce the star of the show, Brona Starr, and that wasn't the pun, it just came out, who's the Programme Director for the MSc in Adolescent Psychotherapy in the Dublin Counselling and Therapy Centre, which is run in partnership with the University of Northampton. She's also the founder and director of the Blackford Adolescent Gestalt Institute. She maintains a private practice in Omagh, Northern Ireland, as a psychotherapist, clinical supervisor, writer and trainer, specialising in working with adolescents, emerging adults and their families. Brona is an adolescent development specialist with considerable experience as a trainer in adolescent development and therapy throughout Ireland. She also teaches and presents internationally on the developmental implication of trauma in the adolescent journey. Her first publication, Adolescent Psychotherapy, A Radical Relational Approach, has received international acclaim, and her second book is due for publication in 2023. Brona will now give us a presentation which will explore developmental considerations relating to young people who've become involved in crime and antisocial behaviour. Her presentation will also focus on how to reach and motivate challenging adolescents. Folks, I give you Brona Starr. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, everybody. As a Tyrone woman, I'm a fairly regular visitor to Crook Park, so it's lovely to be back this afternoon. Is this my clicker? Which button? Top green button. Oh, the big green button. Right, okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the brain in adolescence, and I'm going to keep it very, very simple, but essentially this red piece down here, we'll call it the limbic system, and adolescents start to become very activated in the limbic system. It used to be around 11 and a half, but it's getting younger and younger. We had people talking earlier on about, 8 to 11-year-olds, and they can become quite limbic activated. So when someone is limbic activated, the feelings are down here, so you start to be oriented in terms of what you feel like doing. So I don't feel like doing my homework. I feel like sitting on Snapchat. I don't feel like tidying my bedroom. I feel like playing Call of Duty. So we see young people starting to be really motivated by these feelings, and I work a lot with limbic activated kids and their parents, and I do a lot of training with parents and teachers and all the rest. And within the first 5 minutes you hear 3 words, and when you hear these 3 words you know you have a limbic activated kid, and the first one is attitude. His attitude to school and his attitude to this house and his attitude to homework. The second one is respect. All I want is a bit of respect, and he treats this house like a hotel, and you've no respect for yourself or anybody else. And the third one is trust. You've broken our trust so much and we cannot trust you. So, or even if you're a parent sitting here, if you use those words to describe your kid, you're rearing an activated limbic kid. So also what's in the limbic system is reactivity to emotion, particularly fear and shame and rage. They'll react to things. And addiction is down here as well, and experimentation. And when we're in the limbic system, dopamine is a chemical in the brain. We like dopamine. If I said to you, how about we get together on Friday night and have a couple of glasses of wine? Every time you think about it during the week when you're stressed at work, it'll release a tiny little trickle of dopamine, just that, oh, that'll be nice, we'll do this on Friday night. But for these kids, it's like a power surge of dopamine. They're looking for dopamine all the time. They're really driven to feel good all the time. And then we're just going to miss out the yellow dot, don't worry about that. The frontal lobes is hopefully, not necessarily, but hopefully where the parent is. And when you're in your frontal lobes, you're a good problem solver, you can see the bigger picture, you're very empathic, your empathy's up here. And one of the really curious things that happen is we let children be children, and as soon as people turn 11 or 12 and we see the first notions of teenage life, we expect them to become frontal lobe activated immediately. And there's an awful lot of kind of argy-bargy between parents and teenagers, but I work with all the time. So I'll tell you a quick story. Little Jamie is 14. So he's disposed to do what he feels like doing. He comes home from school and he lives with his mum. He gets in about 4 o'clock, mum doesn't get in until about 6 o'clock. So he comes in and he feels like taking his blazer off, so he takes his blazer off. And then he walks another few steps and he feels like taking his shoes off, so he just kicks them off. And he has the bag over the back. He doesn't feel like doing his homework just yet. He feels like playing Call of Duty or FIFA. But when you're in the limbic system, you also are full of really good intentions. So after one game of Call of Duty, he'll totally do his homework. But for now, he's going to just throw the bag in the corner. And before he gets up the stairs, he feels a little bit peckish. So he goes into the kitchen and he opens the fridge and he takes out the ham and the cheese and he hacks off half a block of cheese and 6 slices of ham, and he drinks the juice from the carton and he leaves it all there because he doesn't think he was feeling peckish and he just wants to nourish this feeling. And he heads up the stairs and he gets the headphones on him and he's playing away at his Call of Duty and he's feeling good. And at the end of his game, he still doesn't feel like doing his homework. He's just going to have one more game of Call of Duty. So fast forward to 6 o'clock, Mum comes in, the bag's still lying there and Jamie's up doing his call of duty. And what happens now is Mum goes, you know, she comes in the door and she goes, oh, for God's sake, look at the shape of that. All he has to do is lift the bloody blazer and hang it up. It literally takes him 2 seconds, and I nearly broke my neck over those shoes. And look at that bag sitting there. This is his big year, and he's going to have to buck up his attitude. And she goes into the kitchen and she's so annoyed at the shape of the kitchen, and how could he not think that's the lunch for everybody, and she's getting more frustrated about his attitude. And she gets up the stairs and she opens the door, get you off that Xbox and get you down that stairs and blah 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 blah. And he's just sitting there going, oh my God, my mother's goal in life is to make my life a misery. Like, she just nags me all the time. And then Mother brings Jamie to therapy with me, and clearly someone has a problem. She identifies it as Jamie, but if we look at Jamie, he's absolutely developmentally on point. He's just doing what he feels like doing. He doesn't see the bigger picture. He has intentions to sort it all out, but he never really does. And what typically happens, and these are kids who have supported development. There's no trauma here in Jamie's life. What happens now is that adults tend to talk to the kids in 3 different ways. We have 3 modes of contact with these kids. Water, give me a sec. I learned my lesson from Rhonda there. So the 3 ways that that adults talk to kids, the first one is nagging. Get off the Xbox and get that homework done. I told you to, have you done that yet? Tidy that room. Look at the shape of this room, it's disgusting. I'm telling you that, get your homework done, get that room tidy, get that dishwasher emptied. And nagging's an expression of powerlessness. And actually what it does is it fractures relationships. Then the second way that adults talk to kids is they give them advice. Look, I don't want you to make the same mistakes that I made. So I'm only telling you this because I wish somebody had told me this. And never in my experience has a limbic activated kid listened to a parent or a teacher or someone and went, thank you very much for that wonderful information. I will integrate it forthwith. Therapists are also give this information and advice. We call it psychoeducation. And when you're working with limbic activated kids, what happens is you start to talk at them. You're giving them really, you know, this kid's into drugs, and you're giving them the talk about the dangers of drugs, and they're going, yep, and they're going, oh my God, that woman's 40, like she's absolutely, literally no idea, like seriously. I remember one time I was talking to a young fella, and while speeding around the roads and 100 mile an hour and all, and I'd said to him, you know, you do realise that 60 miles an hour is the speed limit? And he said, my fucking granny'd walk faster. So the kind of thing is how to get through to these kids. And the third way that we talk to these kids or try to reach them is punishment. So she was caught doing something, so she's not allowed to the disco, and the phone's off her. So Friday night she's sitting up in her bedroom, and when we punish these kids, what we're hoping is that these kids are sitting upstairs going, I'm really annoyed at my mother, but you know what? I'm more annoyed at myself. And she was right, you know, I really do need to take personal accountability. Do you know what? I actually respect her decisions, and I really need to change. I'm sitting up in my bedroom going, I fucking hate my mother. I need to be cuter in terms of how I get round, or maybe next time just stay in my friend's house or drink vodka because there's no smell of your breath. So the difficulty is that these kids, often the adult attempts to reach them create shame, and they don't reach the kids. So a lot of young people who are limbic activated will say to me, I know that my parents care about me, but I don't think that they like me because they criticize me all the time. These kids are waiting for adults to, they're always in trouble with adults. At school, you know, if you ever had on your report card in school, has potential, needs to apply himself, that was limbic activation, which translates as a fucking nightmare to teach because he's so disruptive. So that's really developmentally appropriate stuff. And what happens is, if we go back to Jamie's story, Jamie, his mother wants this to happen. She wants him to be frontal lobe activated. He comes in from school and he takes the blazer off and he thinks, do you know what, if I just put it in the cloakroom and put my shoes in there as well, and then they'll be ready for the morning and they'll not be rolled up in a ball and I'll not be keeping my mother late. And I've got the bag over my back and God, I'd love to play a game of Call of Duty, but you know what, if I just get my homework done now, I'll have it all out of the road and I'll have the whole evening to play Call of Duty. And I would love to have something to eat, but I don't want to ruin my dinner, so I'll not have anything. Or maybe I'll have a wee bit of salad just. So he's upstairs doing his homework, and he has empathy because he's frontal lobe activated, and he thinks, gosh, my poor mother, you know, she works her fingers to the bone, God bless her. The least I could do is go down and put the spuds on because she'd be having to come home and cook the dinner for us. So he goes home, down and he peels the spuds and he leaves them in the saucepan. And then he goes back up to finish his homework because he's very, very good concentration. And she comes in and at 6 o'clock and he comes down to meet her. And he has a full emotional conversation with her because he's emotional language for his experience now too. And asking her how her day went and giving her a really full and florid description of his day. And in the middle of the conversation, Mum, I'd like a wee cup of tea. Sit there and I'll get you a cup of tea when we're chatting. That's what Mum wants, which actually is a brain transplant. That is not where Jamie is. And a lot of these parents who have tremendously, like they're so supportive and they've very, very developmentally appropriate kids and there's no trauma or neglect or abuse or anything like that. Quite frequently these parents will say to me, Jesus Christ, Brona, like, is he a psychopath or what's going on with him? Like, what kind of an adult is he going to be? Because when you're limbic activated, you resemble psychopathic personality disorder. Because the frontal lobes is where we have access to lots of, like green button, or the prefrontal cortex. We have access to things like impulse control, like, you know, those lovely chocolate desserts we had there. So in the prefrontal cortex, oh, I'd love one of them, but I know I'm trying to lose weight and it's not good for my sugar levels. And no, I'm just going to say no. We are able to think and to think about the bigger picture. We have empathy, so we can imagine the other person. And we have future orientation as well. So we can imagine the future. These things are offline to these kids. Now, developmentally, boys typically are in the limbic system from age 11 and a half till about 14. No, sorry, 11 and a half till about 16. Girls, 11 and a half to about 14 and a half. So boys are in the limbic system much longer, and they are much more impulsive then. But the difficulty, and I think that this is probably most of the kids that you're working with, is a lot of kids end up with entrenched impulsivity. They never leave the limbic system. In fact, in childhood, they got entrenched here. And now they emerge into their adolescence. And this is their profile. They just do whatever they feel like doing. They don't think, they don't understand or perceive the consequences. They're really, really reactive. They don't have empathy. So I'll do whatever, I'm sexually aroused because I've been watching porn and I feel like being sexual with someone because I feel, there's going to be a lovely release of dopamine there. I feel that I want sexual gratification. And I lack empathic resonance. So I can just do whatever I feel like doing. And again, you know, a lot of the entrenchment is to do with trauma. And also, quite often, it is to do with growing up in a limbic activated family, where there maybe was addiction or a lot of chaos. You know, we were hoping that Jamie's mother was in her frontal lobes, but not necessarily. A lot of times we have what I call limbic parties, where the kid, and even, you know, this happens very typically in development. So, you know, the kid will not tidy her bedroom, and mum keeps coming in, she's doing the nagging to get that bedroom tidied. Right, literally, going to do it in 20 minutes, get out. And this just builds up and builds up. And then she loses the plot and starts shouting at her mum. And her mum becomes limbic activated and starts roaring and shouting at her, and there's screaming matches now. So if you have grown up in a limbic culture, often we learn to be limbic activated in the world as well. More water. So the difficulty is that the way that we traditionally talk to and try to reach these kids doesn't work. The nagging, you know, don't do that. Don't be out drinking. Now, I'm telling you not to be drinking. Don't be having sex. You'll get somebody pregnant. Don't be doing. Like, kids will go, yeah, right, whatever you think. You have no idea. The advice given, the psychoeducation, that works to a certain extent, and it works very well with kids in the cerebral cortex and kids who are frontal lobe activated. It tends not to work for limbic activated kids so much, because they learn through experience, not through advice. They cannot conceptualize. You know, did you ever have a conversation with a limbic kid and you're just having this phenomenal conversation, and there's so much happening in it, and it's just amazing, and it's going to be life-changing, and then they come back next week and say, did you think much? I couldn't remember what we were talking about. And you think, like, hello? Is there any point? That happens so much, but actually what's going on in the limbic system is these kids don't have access to linguistic conceptualization. So a lot of your words are lost on these kids. They're nodding, And when I am talking to a limbic kid, I can see where we're going. I can see his future. I can see the empathic. I can see all of these things. And I make the assumption that he can as well. But actually, developmentally, they're incapable of it. Or the third one is that we punish these kids. And again, it's, you know, I'm grounded because I was caught out with my boyfriend and I'm not allowed out on Friday night. But when there's entrenched impulsivity, the stakes are much higher, and it's criminal justice system here we come almost inevitably. Another thing that limbic activated kids like to do is they really like to be friends with other limbic kids, you know, because the other ones are all bloody goody two-shoes. They're no fun. So we're always looking for the other kids with a twinkle in their eye, or someone with belonging as well. So these are, we talk about limbic kids as being very easily influenced and very immature. And that can really open themselves up. You know, I feel good with older guys who give me money and give me a sense of belonging. And we have great crack, and they buy me drink, and it's really good. I feel good. So this is really working for these kids. And then we hold them to account. And you know, it's just been really marvellous being here today and listening to some of the stuff that people were talking about, because we have progressed so much in terms of how to reach these limbic kids. Just very quickly, the other two types. The cerebral cortex, these are the highly anxious kids who overthink all the time, and they're terrified of letting people down and failing. They're all perfectionists. They've got a very different profile. You tend not to meet too many of them in a youth diversion project. Or the frontal lobe activated kids, they're the leaders in society and the debaters, and they're really responsible. We call them sensible. You know, if I meet a mom and she's got 3 different teenagers, actually it turns out now that you need, in these days and age, you need 3 different parenting strategies in adolescence depending on what type of a kid you have. But if I say to this kid, this mother, well, how's wee Charlie doing? And Charlie's the limbic kid. She'll go, oh Jesus, he's a wild man, I don't know what we're going to do. And there's a lot of rolling the eyes and hands up, and I'm lost. And what about Mary, how's she doing? And Mary's the cerebral cortex anxious kid. The mother will turn the head to the side and put the sympathy in her voice. Oh, God bless the wee pet, you know, we're awful worried about her, and she will find it well hard to go to school, the wee darling, you know. And then we do a very Irish thing with the frontal lobe one. And what about Jane, how she did? Well, thank God Jane's given us no bother. She's never given us one moment's bother in her life. So one of the things also is that we use microaggressions when we're talking to these kids as well. Like, these 3 kids get off the bus, and mum turns round to the frontal lobe one, and she speaks with interest and with curiosity. Well, Jane, how did you get on today? Oh, that sounds really interesting. Tell me a wee bit about that. Isn't that great? They have a conversation. Mum forgets that she's only 14 because she's more like an adult. And then the wee middle one gets off, Mary, who's the anxious one. Oh, darling, how did you get on today, pet? Did you have a wee panic attack, darling? I'll make you a wee hot chocolate and we'll have a wee talk about your wee worries. Which is terrible because mum's going, I have no faith in you and I don't expect you to have any faith in yourself. But what happens, even I notice in body language and tone of voice, we microaggressions all the time. The limbic one comes in, well, how did you get on today? Well, have you any homework? No, let me see that homework diary. It's like, I don't trust you. I expect there was trouble with a capital T. And these kids, you know, one of the big things about them is they don't take themselves seriously. They don't give a fuck. I don't care. I literally don't care. So our big question is, how do you get them to care about themselves? And another kind of couple of ways that we talk to these kids, I spend my life deconstructing this contact, is we banter with them and we use humour with them. And that's another way to support them to not take themselves seriously. Like, this is the kid who comes into the youth club and it's like, well, how are you? There's aggression in your contact there as well. So I suppose there's a few things. Shame-free relational contact is so important, and that is something that, you know, the researchers were talking about earlier on. These kids expect shame from the adult world. If I am does red mean I still have time? Or am I out of time? I still have time, okay. Like, if we're walking down the corridor in school, and I'm the teacher and I see one kid, so everybody's in class and there's one kid walking down the corridor, and it's the limbic kid, hands in the hips. Excuse me, where do you think you're going? Get you back to your class very quickly. And I'll stand and watch the kid and make sure they go back because we don't trust the kid. Which is probably right, because he probably got out 15 minutes ago for no good reason and he's just messing about till the bell goes. Then the other kid comes in, and she's anxious, and I'll go over to her and go, darling, are you okay, pet? Do you need to see the school nurse? Will we ring your mummy and she'll come and get you? And the directional kid who's frontal lobe activated, you walk past them in the corridor and you go, good morning, and walk past. Don't need to worry about where they're going because we trust these kids because they're really sensible. So the adult world actually generates a lot of shame in our contact with these kids. unconsciously through our bodies, through our tone of voice, through the content of our conversations. I see it all the time. I see, you know, Jamie and his mother, I see it happening all the time. One of the things that I spend my life doing is training professionals how to make really rich contact with these kids without shame. And that's what, when we saw the deconstruction of the research, that's what was coming out to me, is like what these kids say that works, what creates the richness is non-shame and contact. Another thing that works really well is these kids just want to feel good all the time. And I feel good by having sex, smoking weed, not me personally, drinking, you know, getting up to hijinks. The amount of dopamine, see when we're breaking an entry, or see when we're going to beat somebody up, or oh my God, the amount of dopamine, it's like there's so much, the adrenaline, the dopamine, I feel so alive. There's so much trauma in the ground of my experience. That there's actually something incredibly life-giving around this severe risk-taking for me. And also because I don't think the consequences are like, yeah, it'll be all right, we'll probably not get caught. In fact, for example, birth control is, I don't need to worry about condoms or anything like that because my boyfriend's lovely and he would never do that to me. And also I don't want to get pregnant, so we should be good to go. But pro-social engagement is really good because it gives them another feel-good. Like, these kids often have a real, you know, they're not psychopaths yet anyway. But a lot of, I know in the North we refer to them as bad wee bastards. I don't know what you're kind of, yeah, but they're not. We have to have a tremendous posture of hope with these kids. So they were the ways that I felt good. And also very often my parents were anti-role models, or the teacher, all the adults that I've had have been anti-role models. I look at my father and I go, that's who I don't want to be in the world, but I don't have a role model. So you professionals often become their mentors and their role models. This is who I want to be. Sometimes when I'm trying to give hope to a young fella, for example, or young girl who has just got nothing, you just think, oh my God, there's just despair there. And you know that you've become a mentor. What I'll say is, like, do you know what? You'd make a fantastic therapist. You'd be brilliant because you've been through so much and you'd just be inspirational. And they'll turn around and go, actually, I was thinking of becoming a therapist. Now, they won't become a therapist, but you're buying time, because then say, well, actually, it means you have to go back to school to become I suppose I might think about that. You know, your connection, if it's non-shaming, is very powerful. And for example, on Twitter, I follow Donegal Feroiga, if there's anybody from here. I saw a post up about bicycle refurbishment with these kids. And you can just imagine that pro-social behaviour and the feel-good out of that we've done this thing and we're giving back to the community, and Jesus, the dopamine coming through is great. You're giving them an option of, there's other ways to feel good that don't get me into trouble and won't end me in front of the guards or the JLOs or whatever. And I'm doing it with my mentor's support as well. And remembering that the conceptualization in terms of visual and practical conceptualization is really good. Mobilizing on your feet with these kids is huge. I'm just going to very quickly, 41 seconds. This is the type of intervention that I do. So this kid at the top is my client, and over here is what he wants. So he wants a nice girl. And he wants a really good job, and he's going to retire as a millionaire at 40. Great intentions. But over here, he's smoking weed, he's dealing a bit, he doesn't give a fuck about school, he gets drunk, he gets hungover, he gets really angry and is very aggressive. And then we have his parents and the policeman. And also down at the bottom right, we have what happens when he gets drunk and how awful he feels when he's hungover and the anxiety that he feels. So we started to kind of deconstruct this in terms of his impulse is he just wants if everybody, all the adults in my world would back off, I'd be fine. Which is typical limbic activation. And then you start kind of pointing out the discrepancies. Well, actually, you're not going to get a good girl because you're a weed dealer. How's that for you? And also the fact that he's had a weekend with loads of coke and he doesn't feel good now, and you start pointing out the discrepancies. But I make my conversations visual. So what happens is this guy will not remember our conversation, no matter how inspirational I think I was. He'll remember the picture. He will remember it, and when he's feeling good, he doesn't give a fuck about this. But the penny drops a little bit more the next time the shit show unfolds, because he'll identify with, like, you know, the little purple figure or something and realize, I'm making life much more difficult. If I took more support from Brona, maybe things would be easier. And I think we're getting better, that we're moving towards understanding these limbic kids so much more, and neutralising so much of the shame that they anticipate with adults. What we're really trying to do is support them to be frontal lobe activated, you know, like Jimmy's mum. So the work that you do, the transformative work with these kids, and somebody was talking earlier on about hard to reach kids, and all, it's like every time you have rich interactions, non-shaming interactions with these kids, you're moving them higher into the frontal lobes. And when we reach the frontal lobes, we are responsible, personally accountable citizens. So as I said, a tremendously hopeful posture is really important. We don't think about them as bad wee bastards. It's like the school record, has potential, needs support to apply himself. So, Gurmila Mayagov.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Brona. The life coach in me was screaming down at about 20 or 30 different questions I wanted to ask you, but today's not about me and the questions I want to ask. But one that did come to mind, particularly, say, looking at some of the work that was we've done in Oberstown and what they're doing with some of the young people in relation to mindfulness, etc. Programs like mindfulness programs in school, that type of thing, could they have an impact on the sort of limbic activation and bringing people into that sort of frontal lobe area?
It depends. I guess I find that the mindfulness programs are wonderful, but they can be premature for these kids. Like, you know, if I'm doing a mindfulness class now, it's the limbic activated kids. I'm doing behaviour management with them because they're going to giggle and set everybody else off. It's how they can take it seriously. So they need a big rationale. And they need an awful lot of support before they engage with the mindfulness, and then they'll do it. Otherwise, they're sitting there and there's one eye open, kind of looking around, and they get bored. And yeah.
You can tell I don't have a huge amount of direct engagement with young people if I ask that question. But okay, so we have some roving mics there, and if there's any questions in the audience. If not, I do have question number 2. Okay, well, I'm going to go with my question number 2. Is it possible for young people who are actively engaged in social media on an ongoing basis, so that sort of Twitter, TikTok, Snapchat consistent field, if the age profile they're likely to leave it is about 16, will the constant social media use push that back or inhibit that sort of development and moving towards the frontal lobe area?
Yeah, these kids tend to struggle with addiction and dependency, and these are the kids that are still never off their phone and they cannot leave it down. And we have in our brains called a default mode network, which is actually quite underdeveloped in these kids. So I lived in the country when I grew up, and I remember being like really mesmerised by hawthorn leaves just because I was so bored, because there was nobody else or nothing else to do. And the default mode network is basically when you're just sitting there And what emerges is creativity and thinking and self-reflection, and there's actually lovely healing that happens, and it's where self-definition begins. These kids just are constantly on their phones, so their sense of self isn't just as strong, and they like the dopamine kind of hit that happens when they're on Snapchat. So whereas other kids will go, I'll put it down to get on with my work, these kids are like, I'll put it down in 20 minutes. But that doesn't come. Yeah.
Okay. Have you any questions there on the floor? Or am I good? Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask, just the term itself is brand new to me, and just is there a measure or a way of kind of understanding how limbically active a young person is, that people who are working with them would be able to, you know, maybe put something in place or to see how much that's affecting their behaviour? Thanks.
Excellent question. I am writing a book all about this. This is my thesis. And there's different levels. There's developmentally appropriate levels of limbic activity. And the difficulty with that is that parents, adults tend not to, you know, to become quite non-receptive to their kids and adolescents. But then there's that entrenched impulsivity, and there's particular ways of managing that, trying to get these kids to take themselves seriously. There's different contact levels as well. Like if you think of the three different, so these limbic activated kids, and they just want to show up, for example, in therapy, and probably with you guys, you know, the Vicky Pollard, like, do you know what, it's my mom and my dad and the guard and the JLO, and it's everybody's fault, and the teachers, and I literally, like, the teacher literally told me to get out and sent me to detention. I was literally doing nothing, you know, taking no responsibility. And it's like, your contact with them is so very different to the kid who's overwhelmed and anxious and don't know. So the book will deconstruct all of that and talk about the different levels and how to identify how deeply limbic the kid is and how to support them to become frontal lobe activated. Highly recommend it, folks. I also do lots of training, so Google me. There, I got the plug in.
Just the question, is it possible for every young person who is limbic activated to change?
Yeah, I passionately believe that it is. But the level of support that some of them need is maybe their parents need 2 years of intensive residential treatment facility, and then they need 6 months of intense parenting, and then the kid needs 6 months of residential therapeutics, and then we can begin to do some family intervention work with them on a twice weekly basis. So absolutely, but the difficulty is we don't have that luxury. But if we were able to provide the support that they needed, every kid can become frontal, well, not every, but almost all kids can become frontal lobe activated. Sadly, that's just, we tend to pathologize them and they end up in the criminal justice system or diagnosed.
So we'll need Eglon to spend a lot more money. Okay. We have a question back here.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you very much for a very informative talk. It was very interesting. Just wondering, do you feel that there's a need for schools to have more training within the staff regarding how to engage with these young people? You know, like they coming into school in the morning and it's all about the uniform and not the fact that they just showed up. And secondly, I just want to say up Donegal. Okay.
Yeah. Well, they're neighbours, so I'll not fight with you. But yes, I do a lot of training in schools because for teachers these days, delivering the curriculum is the easy thing. It's managing the emotional behavioural needs of the kids. And it's the same as parenting. You need 3 different strategies for educating these kids. Like, the frontal lobe kids, we call them the directional kids, I'd say about 60% of kids in Ireland are directional. They flourish in our education system. They love school, they make friends, they can manage the work. But the anxious ones, our education system isn't fit for purpose for them, because our school system is now anxiety provoking. These kids can't even make it in through the door anymore. And everything about school is anxiety provoking for them. And it's not, how can teachers make it better for them? It's like the system actually isn't working for them. And limbic kids are highly understimulated. Like, you see when you're playing Call of Duty and then you go into fucking Spanish grammar class, like, you know, it's like, good luck. And then we're like, turn you around and sit there properly and behave yourself and your attitude and get up to the vice principal, because I can't manage these kids. And we shame the limbic kids, and as a result, they don't feel good being in school. It's boring. So the methodology for learning is boring for them. It is, they're always in trouble. What I want to do is feel good. So I sit and chat to me friends, or like, I was quite limbic activated as a kid. Do you remember, like, the sub-teacher would come in for a class, God bless her, you'd just make mince, it was just entertainment. So like, teachers are bewildered these days in terms of how to manage the kids. So I do a lot of training in terms of how you make, there's particular ways to make relationship with these impulsive kids that will actually keep them on balance in a classroom or in a group or whatever. But they're not taught at a teacher training college, so most teachers are absolutely out of their depth. Most schools are out of their depth at the minute. Yeah.
Okay. We have time for one more question there? Or I think there's a lady just there.
Hi, first of all, thanks a million. Your talk is extremely interesting.
Thank you.
I'd just love to know your opinion around those limbic kids and diagnoses that they're coming into us with, ADHD, ADD, ODD. Where do you see that in? Where do you see that helping them? Do you see it, diminishing the potential development? Do you think there's a particular age that we should hold off before medication starting? Because you mentioned such an ideal world that parents would have available to them, we'd have available to us, the schools would have available, but it might not be available to everybody. So just what's your opinion on that? And I'm looking forward to your book. It sounds like it's going to be amazing.
Well, I do have another book that you can read while you're waiting on this one. The diagnosis is almost predictable for these impulsive kids. Like, a little, like Jamie, for example, who's up playing Call of Duty, is a bit feisty and a bit of an attitude, and then it progresses into attention difficulties and behaviour difficulties, and so we then go with ADD diagnosis, ODD, and ODD is basically like, you'll fucking not tell me what to do, but we find words, terminology that ends with a D, and we apply it, and medication can help with the limbic as well. But then that will move on to, moods are big here. So bipolar and borderline personality, emotional unregulation personality, and psychopathic, sociopathic personality disorder. These are all the kind of, not inevitabilities, but these are the diagnoses for the limbic kids, and it's where are you on that continuum, and we can absolutely pull them back. But when you're, the sad thing is boys are much more profoundly impacted by and in the limbic system. So he starts school at 5 years of age, and the 3.5-year-old girl can apply herself more, can hear, even has acoustic resonance is 80% less than hers, for example. So the teacher, the first teacher is always a lovely lady with a very soft voice. Now, boys and girls, we're going to go over to the corner and we're going to put our fingers on our lips and I'm going to tell you a story. And he doesn't hear, and he wants to move around and do things. So he's hard to manage. So I'll have a conversation with the educational psychologist or the Senko or something about, we bring mum in and just wonder about his attention and maybe he warrants assessment. And that's a kind of a typical pathway. And again, it's not, you know, it's not an organic, ADHD isn't an organic thing. It's a description of very strong limbic activity. But a lot of these kids will have a pathologized sense of self. I have ADHD, I'm borderline. It's just what I do, it's just how I roll. And it's another way to not take yourself seriously, because there's actually something wrong with me. It's just tragic what we have done to these kids. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Bronagh, for that, and thank you for your questions. I think we're out of time on that, and I'll hand you back over to Declan. Thanks.
So obviously another presentation, second this afternoon, that you could all engage with, judging from the questions and the non-verbal feedback from the room. So thank you, Bronagh, and thank you, Paul, for facilitating that. Two more items. The second one is a few words from me just to close the conference. But before that, and then the doors will be unlocked and you can all leave. But before that, back to the voice of the YDP. We have Lillian Ash, who's from Mountrat, County Laois. She's worked as a youth justice worker in the Port Youth Diversion Project for the past 5 years. Lillian has recently completed a Master's in Human Rights and Criminal Justice Law with the University of Limerick, so she's one of our Action Research Project pioneers. She's a firm believer that building a restorative ethos across all YDPs is a meaningful way of giving a child both a voice and a deeper understanding of the harm caused by their actions. And Lillian sees relationship building as the most important element of the process of restorative justice, and she's going to talk to us about the work of her project. So you have the floor. Thank you, Lillian. This is the most difficult bit when everyone is looking at their watches and bus and train timetables and so on, so I will be very quick, I promise. I was struck by a number of people who were on the stage today who looked down the length of the room and said, God, that's a very big room and there's an awful lot of people here, I'm a little bit nervous. And I was reminded when I arrived this morning, Lorna and the room was empty at that stage, Lorna and Adele asked me, was I going to be nervous? And I won't give the exact answer but the conclusion is the same. The answer is absolutely not. It's an enormous privilege for me to work on something that I believe in and to be with a group of people who are friends and colleagues, and even those of you that I don't know, I can admire the work that you're doing. So it has been, I'm using the past tense, but this is not a goodbye, but it has been a real privilege to have the possibility of having a personal impact and being able to support the work that you do. And in any event, my job up here in the front of house, so to speak, is not all that difficult. If I can misquote Tony O'Reilly, confidence is the key. If you can fake that, you have it made. And the reason for that introduction is to allow me to make the serious point that an event like this couldn't take place without a huge amount of work by lots of people over the past several months. So there was a committee. We do anything that's important by setting up a committee and bringing all our stakeholders in. Edel, Lorna, Owen, Damien, a very new recruit to my own team, Cueva, who's a legal intern and is floating around somewhere. Roisin Gaffney, I want to mention, who was involved from our events team in organising previous events and disappeared a few weeks ago on foot of a very well-deserved promotion and is now in the Department of Transport. And Angie, who took her place in terms of doing lots of the organisation. I want to mention also again to thank Minister of State Brown. I'm a civil servant, so I'm not making any party political comment, but it's unusual for a minister to be able to find the time to make a speech and then to stay for the morning. He had to disappear for the afternoon, and that's a demonstration of his commitment and his interest, and he's been a real champion for the work that we're doing and for the work of the projects. Back to the organising of the event. A lot of the work was done by our events team today. So Angie, I mentioned, Anya Griffin, who was, I think, the first person many of you would have met after the lift, who's our head of events and communications within the department, and our colleagues Rob, Rory, Aileen and Joan. And there's a danger of making an enemy for life if I leave somebody out, but I think I've got everybody there on the team. If I haven't, I'll be told about it. The IT team, only one gremlin to deal with, which they handle very well, so thank you for that. Crow Park, I want to thank the team here. They managed the large crowd very well. It's a wonderful venue, and they moved us in and out very effectively, and lunch and so on went without any hitches. Want to mention Annabelle Egan, who is here and once again has taken on the responsibility for writing the report of the conference, so there will be a report and you'll get that in due course. Want to mention my colleague Brendan Sheehy, that many of you would have known, who retired a few weeks ago early, and to our enormous surprise and consternation, he's been replaced by Ross Wynne, who was floating around earlier, who's taken on youth justice responsibilities without being able to extricate himself from his current responsibilities, so he'll be in transition for some time. I mentioned Coiva, who was a legal intern with the department, been dumped into the deep end and has demonstrated a remarkable ability to swim. So she's going to be a real asset for us for as long as she stays with the department. Thank all the speakers, the panelists and the moderators. Thank you. There was a really good atmosphere in the room today, so that's an indication that we got something right, and particularly the engagement with the afternoon sessions. Thank those of you who asked questions. Thank you for the real impact that you have on the lives of the most disadvantaged young people, and the work that you do to make Irish society a better place for them and to give them life chances that they wouldn't have were it not for the work that you were doing. Finally, there was a question that wasn't asked, for which I'm grateful, but I'm going to answer it anyway. Sean Redmond has led on work reviewing our funding model. Preliminary work was about back office costs, management fees, and all that sort of stuff. We're there. There's a price tag. It's an expensive one, but that piece has been completed in principle. We now move on to look at terms and conditions and salaries. There's an important principle. The department isn't the employer. The CBOs are the employer. The way we've organised this service and other services in the social policy area is, in my opinion, a really good way of organising services, public money, local NGO and local community enthusiasm and commitment, but it's not to be done on the cheap. People should have fair terms and conditions. And that issue has been raised at central government level in terms of mental health, disability, youth service and so on. So it's an item that's on our agenda. For now, all I can say is that we haven't been in a position where CBOs put in funding bids to make sure that people were paid reasonable salaries and good terms and conditions that we refused. There's a limited amount of money. It's increased quite substantially, but we're not yet in the position where we were going back in the previous decade, where we were all being cut. We're trying to catch up in terms of restoration and so on, in line with public sector pay restoration generally. So I want to acknowledge that the question is there and it's something we're working on, and grateful it wasn't raised from the floor, but I thought I was obliged to try and address the issues in any event. So that's it. See you all again next year. The doors will now be opened and you're all free to leave. Thank you all.